I never thought I'd be writing this down, but here I am, trying to make sense of what happened 3 days ago. My hands are still shaking as I type these words, and I keep looking over my shoulder even though I know David won't be home for hours. Maybe putting it all down will help me understand how I got here, how I became someone I don't recognize. It was Tuesday afternoon, one of those crisp October days when the light filters through the kitchen window just right, casting golden rectangles across our hardwood floors. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt as I stood at the sink, washing the lunch dishes with methodical precision. The smell of the lavender dish soap mixed with the lingering aroma of the turkey sandwich I'd made earlier, creating this domestic symphony that should have been comforting. But underneath it all, there was this restless energy humming through my veins, this need for something I couldn't quite name. David had left that morning for what was supposed to be a 3-day business trip to Portland. I'd kissed him goodbye at 6:47 a.m. I remember checking the microwave clock because I was already calculating how long I'd have. How long I'd have for what, I wasn't entirely sure yet, but the thought had been growing in my mind for weeks, like a seed in dark soil. The house felt different when he was gone, bigger somehow, full of possibilities and secrets. I'd put on my favorite playlist, the one with all the songs David says are too melancholy, and let Billie Holiday's voice fill the empty spaces. The afternoon sun slanted through our living room, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits, and I felt this overwhelming urge to do something, anything that was entirely my own. I finished the dishes and dried my hands on the blue kitchen towel, the one with the small coffee stain near the bottom that I could never quite get out. My wedding ring caught the light as I folded the towel, and for a moment I just stared at it, this symbol of promises and permanence that suddenly felt so heavy on my finger. That's when I heard it, the sound that changed everything. It wasn't much, just the soft thud of something hitting our back fence, probably a bird or a squirrel, but it made me look out the kitchen window toward our neighbor's yard, and that's when I saw him. Marcus was in his garden again, kneeling among the late-season tomatoes, his dark hair catching the autumn light. He was wearing that faded green t-shirt I'd noticed before, the one that clung to his shoulders in a way that made my breath catch. I'd been watching him for months now, stealing glances, when I was supposedly tending to my own small herb garden, or bringing in the mail. It started innocently enough, just appreciating the view, I told myself, just admiring the careful way he tended his plants, the gentle concentration on his face as he worked. But somewhere along the line, it had become something else. Something that made my pulse quicken and my palms sweat. Something that made me linger at the kitchen window longer than I should, timing my trips to the mailbox with his afternoon garden routine. Today felt different, though. Maybe it was the golden light, or the knowledge that David wouldn't be home until Friday, or maybe it was just that I'd reached some internal breaking point I didn't know I'd been approaching. But as I watched Marcus work, dirt, smudging his forearms, completely absorbed in his task, I felt a reckless courage bloom in my chest. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was walking toward the back door. My hands were trembling as I turned the knob, and I had to take 3 deep breaths before I could step outside. The October air was crisp against my skin, carrying the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke from someone's chimney. I could hear the distant sound of children playing in the park 2 blocks over, their laughter mixing with the rustle of wind through the maple tree that straddled our property line. Marcus looked up as I approached the fence. His eyes were even greener up close, flecked with gold that matched the afternoon light. There was dirt on his cheek, and I had the strangest urge to reach out and brush it away. "Hey, Sarah," he said, sitting back on his heels. "How's it going?" "Good," I managed, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Your tomatoes look amazing." He smiled, and something warm unfurled in my stomach. "Thanks. This variety is called Cherokee Purple. They're heirlooms supposed to have this incredible, smoky flavor." We'd had conversations like this before, safe exchanges about gardening and weather and the neighborhood. But today, standing there in my old jeans and David's college sweatshirt, I felt like I was balanced on the edge of a cliff, wind whipping around me, daring me to jump. "I was just making some coffee," I heard myself say. "Would you like some?" The words hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning that had nothing to do with coffee. Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, a recognition of what I was really asking. "I'd love some," he said quietly. The walk back to my house felt surreal, like I was moving through water or a dream. Marcus wiped his hands on a towel he pulled from his back pocket and followed me through the gate that separated our yards. The gate that had always felt like such a clear boundary, but now seemed laughably inadequate. In my kitchen, everything looked the same, but felt completely different. The golden light was still streaming through the windows. Billie Holiday was still singing about love and loss, but now Marcus was here, his presence filling the space in a way that made my skin feel too tight. I busied myself with the coffee maker, hyper-aware of his every movement behind me. He was looking at the photos on our refrigerator pictures of David and me at various family gatherings, vacation snapshots, the life we'd built together over 8 years of marriage. I wondered what he saw in those images, what story they told him about who I was supposed to be. "You and David seem happy," he said, and there was something careful in his voice, like he was testing the waters. I poured water into the coffee maker, my hands steadier than I expected. "We are," I said, and it was true mostly. David was a good man, reliable and kind and devoted. But standing there with Marcus in my kitchen, I realized that happiness and contentment weren't the same thing, that you could love someone deeply and still feel like you were slowly disappearing. "But," Marcus prompted gently, I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "But sometimes I wonder who I am when no one's looking. Does that make sense?" He nodded, his eyes never leaving my face. "It makes perfect sense." The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with its familiar rhythm. I found myself studying Marcus's face, the way his lips curved slightly upward even when he wasn't smiling, the small scar near his left temple that I'd noticed from my window but never seen this clearly. "How long have you been married?" I asked, though I already knew he'd been divorced for 2 years. I'd heard it through neighborhood gossip, filed it away like a secret treasure. "I'm not," he said. "Not anymore." "Right, I'm sorry, I forgot." "No, you didn't." The honesty in his voice made something flutter in my chest. He was right, I hadn't forgotten. I'd thought about his divorce more than I should have, wondered what had gone wrong, whether he was lonely in that big house all by himself. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured 2 cups, adding cream to mine and sliding his across the counter. Our fingers brushed as he took it, and I felt that touch like electricity, racing up my arm and settling somewhere low in my belly. "Sarah," he said quietly, and the way he said my name made me look up. "What are we doing here?" It was such a simple question, but it contained everything. All the stolen glances, the carefully timed encounters, the growing tension that had been building between us for months. I could have deflected, made some joke about neighborly hospitality, pretended I didn't know what he meant. But something in his eyes, some combination of understanding and desire and infinite patience, made me want to tell the truth. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just know that I've been thinking about you, and it's driving me crazy, and David's gone, and what? And I feel like I'm disappearing, Marcus. Like I've been this perfect wife for so long that I don't remember who I am underneath it all." He set his coffee down and moved closer, close enough that I could smell his soap and the earth from his garden, and something indefinably male that made my head spin. "Who do you want to be?" he asked. It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked me what I wanted, not as David's wife, or my parents' daughter, or my colleague's friend, but just as me? "I want to be someone who takes chances," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Someone who doesn't always do the right thing." Marcus reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch so gentle it made my eyes water. "And what would that look like?" I knew what he was asking, and I knew that my answer would change everything. There would be no taking it back, no pretending it never happened. David would be home in 3 days, and I'd have to look him in the eye knowing what I'd done. But in that moment, with Marcus's hand still lingering near my face, and the afternoon light painting everything gold, I couldn't bring myself to care about consequences. "It would look like this," I said, and kissed him. The world exploded into sensation. His lips soft, but insistent, his hands threading through my hair, the taste of coffee on his tongue. I felt like I was falling and flying at the same time, like every nerve ending in my body had suddenly come alive after years of sleepwalking. We kissed until I was breathless, until I was pressed back against the counter, with his body warm and solid against mine. His hands were everywhere, tracing the line of my jaw, sliding down my back, settling on my hips with a possessiveness that made me gasp. "Are you sure?" he whispered against my lips, and the question held so much weight, so much understanding of what we were about to cross. "No," I said honestly, "but I need this. I need to know what it feels like to be wanted like this." He looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for something I wasn't sure he'd find. Then he took my hand and led me toward the stairs. Everything that happened next felt both dreamlike and hyper-real. The creak of the third step that David always skipped, the way the afternoon light slanted through our bedroom windows, the surreal sight of Marcus in this most intimate space that had belonged only to my husband and me for 8 years. I remember every detail with painful clarity, the way he kissed my neck like he was savoring something precious, how his hands shook slightly as they found the hem of my sweatshirt, the look of wonder in his eyes when I reached for the buttons of his shirt. It was like being reborn, like discovering I had a body capable of things I'd forgotten were possible. Afterwards, we lay tangled in sheets that smelled like my lavender fabric softener, and something new, something that was purely us. Marcus traced lazy circles on my bare shoulder while I listened to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. The sun was lower now, casting longer shadows across the floor, and I felt this strange combination of peace and panic, like I'd just woken up from the most beautiful dream, only to remember it was all real. "I should go," Marcus said eventually, but he made no move to leave. "I know," I replied, but I pulled him closer instead of letting go. We might have stayed like that forever, frozen in that moment of impossible tenderness, if not for the sound that changed everything, the garage door opening 2 floors below. I bolted upright so fast I nearly fell off the bed. Oh God, that's David. He's not supposed to be home until Friday." Marcus was already reaching for his clothes, his face pale. The Portland meeting must have been canceled. I was throwing on my sweatshirt with shaking hands, my mind racing through the logistics of getting him out of the house undetected. But even as I planned our escape, I could hear David's footsteps on the stairs, his familiar whistle echoing through the hallway. "The window," I whispered, but we were on the 2nd floor, and there was no way down that wouldn't result in broken bones. "Sarah?" David's voice drifted up from the landing. "Honey, are you home? I saw your car in the driveway." I looked at Marcus, who was standing frozen by my dresser, half-dressed and wild-eyed. In that moment, I realized that this was it, the moment that would define the rest of my life. There was no hiding, no explaining away what David was about to find. In 30 seconds, he would walk through that door and see his wife with another man in their bed, and everything we'd built together would be over. "I'm so sorry," I whispered to Marcus, though I wasn't sure if I was apologizing for what was about to happen to him or for what I'd done to David or for the choice I'd made that led us all here. The footsteps were closer now, right outside the bedroom door. I could hear David humming under his breath, probably smiling, maybe excited to surprise me with his early return. The man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who held me when I cried at movies, who'd never once raised his voice at me in 8 years of marriage, was about to have his world shattered by my selfishness. "Sarah?" The doorknob turned. Time slowed to a crawl as the door opened. I watched David's face change from confusion to shock, to something I'd never seen there before, a kind of devastation that made my chest feel like it was caving in. His briefcase fell from his hand and hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo forever. For a moment, none of us moved. We were like figures in a tableau, frozen in the aftermath of betrayal. David's eyes moved from me to Marcus, to the rumpled bed, to our clothes scattered on the floor, taking in the evidence of what had happened in the home he'd thought was safe. "David," I started, but what could I possibly say? What words existed for this moment? He held up a hand, and I fell silent. His face was white, his jaw working like he was trying to speak but couldn't form the words. When he finally found his voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "How long?" "This is the first time," I said quickly. "David, I swear, this is the first time." He laughed then, a sound so bitter and broken it made me flinch. "The first time, like that's supposed to make this better?" Marcus stepped forward, his shirt still unbuttoned. "Look, man, Don't," David said without looking at him. "Don't you dare speak to me in my own house." The silence stretched between us, heavy with 8 years of marriage and trust and love that I'd destroyed in one afternoon of recklessness. I wanted to run to David, to throw myself at his feet and beg for forgiveness, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was watching everything happen from outside my own body, like this was someone else's life falling apart. "I came home early to surprise you," David said, his voice hollow. "The Portland meeting was canceled, and I thought we could have a nice evening together, maybe order Thai food, watch that movie you've been wanting to see." Each word was like a knife, and I realized that this was what I'd truly done. Not just betrayed my husband, but destroyed the man who'd loved me unconditionally, who'd planned his whole life around making me happy. Marcus finished buttoning his shirt and moved toward the door. "I'll go," he said quietly. "Yeah, you do that," David replied, still not looking at him. "And if I see you near my house again, we're going to have a problem." Marcus glanced at me one last time, and I saw something like regret in his eyes, maybe even pity. Then he was gone, and I was alone with my husband and the wreckage of everything we'd built together. David sat heavily on the edge of the bed, our bed, and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, and I realized he was crying. In 8 years together, I'd seen David cry maybe 3 times. When his father died, when we lost the baby we'd tried so hard for, and now, because of me. "Why?" he asked without looking up. "Just tell me why." I searched for an answer that would make sense, that would somehow justify what I'd done. But every reason I could think of sounded selfish and small in the face of his pain. "I felt invisible," I said finally, like I was disappearing a little more each day. He looked up at me then, his eyes red and confused. "Invisible? Sarah, you're my whole world. How could you feel invisible?" And that was the cruelest irony of all. David did love me, completely and devotedly, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being able to feel it. His love had become like oxygen, essential but unnoticed, until it was gone. "I know you love me," I said, tears finally coming. "I know you're a good husband, and I know I don't deserve you, but I felt like I was sleepwalking through my life, going through the motions of being who everyone expected me to be, without remembering who I actually was. So you decided to fuck the neighbor." The vulgarity was so unlike him that it hit me like a slap. David never swore, never raised his voice, never said anything cruel. But I'd pushed him past the boundaries of who he thought he was, just like I'd pushed myself. "It wasn't about sex," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. "No? Then what was it about? Help me understand how 8 years of marriage meant so little that you could throw it away for one afternoon with someone you barely know." I had no answer for that, because the truth was that 8 years of marriage had meant everything to me, right up until the moment it didn't. Right up until I convinced myself that I deserved something more. Something different. Something that was just mine. "I don't know," I whispered. I honestly don't know. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Marcus had been working just hours before. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that should have been beautiful, but just seemed like a mockery of the perfect afternoon that had turned into a nightmare. "I keep thinking about this morning," he said, his back still turned to me. "How you kissed me goodbye, made me coffee, told me to have a safe trip. Were you already planning this? Were you thinking about him while you were kissing me?" "No," I said quickly. "David, no. It just happened. I saw him in his garden, and I invited him in for coffee, and things just escalated." "Things just escalated," he repeated, "like you had no choice in the matter, like you were some passive victim of circumstances, instead of a grown woman who made a conscious decision to cheat on her husband." He was right, and we both knew it. I could have stayed inside, could have kept my coffee invitation to myself, could have stopped things at any point along the way. But I hadn't, because in those moments with Marcus, I'd felt more alive than I had in years. "I'm sorry," I said, knowing the words were inadequate. "David, I'm so sorry." He turned to look at me then, and I saw that something fundamental had changed in his eyes. The unconditional love I'd taken for granted was still there, but it was different now, wounded and wary and uncertain. "Are you?" he asked. "Are you really sorry, or are you just sorry you got caught?" The question hung between us like a challenge, demanding a level of honesty I wasn't sure I was capable of. Because the truth was, I wasn't entirely sure. I was sorry for David's pain, sorry for the destruction I'd caused, sorry for the look of devastation on his face. But was I sorry for the afternoon itself? For the way Marcus had made me feel, for the reminder that I was still a woman capable of being desired, for the brief escape from the comfortable monotony of my life. "I'm sorry I hurt you," I said carefully. "I never wanted that." "But you're not sorry you did it." It wasn't a question, and we both knew it. David had always been able to read me better than anyone, and apparently infidelity hadn't changed that. "I don't know," I admitted. "I know I should be. I know what I did was wrong, and I know it's destroyed everything good between us. But I can't honestly say I regret feeling alive again, even for just a few hours." David nodded slowly, like he was processing something he'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. "That's what I thought." He moved around the room then, gathering some clothes from the dresser and his closet. I watched in growing panic as he stuffed them into the overnight bag he just brought back from his abbreviated business trip. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I don't know yet. A hotel? Maybe my brother's place? I just need some time to think." "David, please don't go. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "Can we?" he interrupted. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already made your choice. You chose to blow up our marriage for an afternoon with someone you barely know, and you're not even sorry about it." "I am sorry." "No, Sarah, you're not, and maybe that's the most honest thing that's happened between us in a long time." He zipped up his bag and headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "I'll be in touch about logistics, what happens next." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "It means I need to figure out if there's anything left of us worth saving, and you need to decide who you want to be, because the woman I married wouldn't have done this. The woman I married would have talked to me if she was feeling invisible, instead of running to the first man who paid attention to her." The words cut deep because they were true. The woman David had married 6 years ago would have been horrified by what I'd done today. She would have found a way to work through her restlessness, would have invested in her marriage instead of looking for excitement elsewhere. But that woman had felt increasingly like a costume I wore, rather than who I actually was. And maybe that was the real tragedy, not just that I'd betrayed my husband, but that I'd lost myself so completely That betrayal felt like the only way back to authenticity. "I love you," I called out as he reached the top of the stairs. He stopped but didn't turn around. "I love you too. That's what makes this so fucking devastating." Then he was gone, and I was alone in our bedroom with the wreckage of everything we'd built together. I could hear his car start in the driveway, could track his progress down the street by the sound of the engine growing fainter. I sat on the bed where Marcus and I had made love just hours before, where David and I had shared 8 years of intimacy and dreams and quiet Sunday mornings. The sheets still smelled like my perfume and Marcus's cologne, and something else I couldn't identify. Maybe regret, maybe freedom, maybe both. Outside, the sky was fully dark now, stars barely visible through the light pollution of our suburban neighborhood. I thought about Marcus, probably back in his house next door, maybe looking out his own window and wondering what he'd gotten himself into. I thought about David, driving to his brother's house or a hotel room, trying to process the fact that his wife had just destroyed their marriage for reasons he couldn't understand. And I thought about myself, sitting alone in the aftermath of the most honest thing I'd done in years, wondering if authenticity was worth the price of everything I'd held dear. The truth is, I still don't know. 3 days later, as I type these words with shaking hands, I'm no closer to understanding whether what I did was the worst mistake of my life or the first step toward becoming who I'm meant to be. All I know is that there's no taking it back, no pretending it never happened. David hasn't come home yet, though he's texted about picking up more clothes. Marcus has kept his distance, probably smart enough to know that whatever happened between us that afternoon exists in a bubble that can't survive the harsh light of reality. And I'm here in our house that feels too big and too empty, trying to figure out what comes next. Maybe David will come back, and we'll find a way to rebuild something from the ashes of what we had. Maybe we'll go to counseling and work through my betrayal and his pain and emerge stronger on the other side. Or maybe this is the end, maybe some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know one thing for certain. I can't go back to sleepwalking through my life, pretending to be satisfied with a love that felt more like habit than choice. Whether that means saving my marriage or ending it, whether it means finding my way back to the woman David fell in love with or becoming someone entirely new, I can't unknow what I learned about myself that afternoon. I am capable of betrayal. I am capable of selfishness. I am capable of destroying something beautiful for the sake of feeling alive. And maybe, in some twisted way, accepting those dark truths about myself is the most honest thing I've done in years. The question now is whether honesty is enough to build a life on, and whether David can love the woman I actually am instead of the woman I pretended to be. I guess we'll both find out together, or we won't. All I know for certain is that everything has changed, and there's no going back to the way things were. For better or worse, I am finally completely awake.